Greetings and welcome to the Undivide Project podcast, Changemakers Edition. This is where we are uplifting and celebrating the voices of people who are making a difference in this fight for climate justice. And I am so excited to have Mr. Sol Salinas with me this afternoon. He is the Executive Vice President for Sustainability at Capgemini. And welcome. Tell me a little bit more about your work and yourself, and let the audience have an opportunity to get to know you a little bit.
Well, first of all, Monica, thank you so much for having me. I'm humbled and privileged that you found me and that we found each other and that you give me the opportunity to speak to your audience. I've been working the topic of sustainability and climate change, dare I say it, for north of 32 years. I came to this topic when I was just out of graduate school. I was working for a small advertising agency in Baltimore and had the good fortune of being given an assignment by the CEO of this ad agency to do a public service campaign for the World Resources Institute, headquartered, of course, here in Washington, D.C. And the World Resources Institute at the time felt it important for us to begin to talk about greenhouse gases, and of course the impact that greenhouse gases would have on our climate. And they hired this agency as a pro bono project, and fortunately the CEO asked me to run it. And we developed a campaign. It went viral, as viral was designed in those days, and got a fair amount of attention, frankly, in the business trade press and the broadcast media, et cetera. And frankly, it became a pivotal moment for me in my career. Several months later, I decided to leave the advertising business and at the behest of my client at the World Resources Institute, was introduced to several individuals at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and ended up interviewing for a position there as, quote unquote, a director of marketing at the EPA. Was a bit unusual in those days, as you might suspect. And of course, the logical question that I asked in the course of the interviews was, what am I exactly marketing? And the response was, we have no idea. You're going to figure that out for us. But suffice it to say, you're going to make it a household word. And that got my attention. So I went in, I left the advertising business and joined the Environmental Protection Agency and became a civil servant, frankly. And we started, identifying ways for the federal government to catalyze industry around climate change. Not too many people were talking about it. So a group of three of us sort of spent a lot of time trying to figure out exactly how to go about mobilizing the power of the marketplace in a way that would help us educate the public around the great risks that we would run if we did not do something about global emissions of greenhouse gases. And one of the seminal programs, of course, that we launched was a program called Energy Star. And I was fortunate enough to be there at the beginning. And one of my claims to fame is I drew up that little Energy Star logo on the back of a napkin at a working happy hour event that the three of us had at the old waterfront here in Washington, D.C. It didn't look anything like it looks now. But of course, after that, the rest is history. So I was brand czar and strategy lead for the Energy Star program from when we launched it in 1991 to about 2006.
Thank you so much for that. I think some of the best ideas come from good company and drawings on napkins. And I appreciate that what's now a household name, right? And something that we are accustomed to looking for as consumers. And so I just want to get you to expand on that a little bit, because one of the challenges when we're talking about climate justice or environmental justice or climate action is making the science and all of the great information we get from the IPCC and other educators and academics like myself, I include myself in the, one struggling with communicating the issue, is helping people make good decisions at the household level and making those decisions accessible. And I know this is something you've been thinking about, and I would love to hear, you weigh in on how do we make this available to people to make household and community level decisions.
Yeah. Well, this is an issue that Of course, I've been grappling with for as long as I can remember. I mean, I think when we first designed the program model around Energy Star, the notion was that let's make sure that we give the consumer a choice to be environmentally responsible with no compromise on product performance whatsoever, which was one of the central tenets and continues to be a central tenet of the Energy Star program. And it's been enormously successful, as you might suspect. Over the course of its 30-year history, it's resulted in just north of 4 billion metric tons of carbon equivalents, which is it's like taking a billion vehicles off the road, which is about 4 times the U.S. fleet. So it's been a success across multiple fronts. But I think we have to be realistic that some consumers have no choice as to the products they buy. I spend a great deal of time in emerging markets. Of course, India is a large market for us at Capgemini. We have a great deal of presence there. It's one of our growth engines, to be honest with you. And so I've spent a great deal of time in Mumbai and Bangalore. And if you've had any opportunity to drive in Mumbai and Bangalore, and you look to the left and look to your right, you might come to the conclusion very quickly that those that are less
Right.
fortunate than we are don't have the luxury of choosing a product that's either Energy Star certified or not. They're fortunate to be able to find anything that would sustain themselves and their families. And so we have to be realistic that those of us who sort of promote environmental responsibility can do so and should continue to do so, but that only is valuable to us as a global community if we also engage those that aren't able to make those choices. And so, how do you do it with those communities? In those
Right.
communities, you create a scenario where they don't have the choice. So I should say you work upstream, which is why we're investing so heavily at Capgemini and with our clients to make sure that we inject as much as possible by way of investments in the energy transition, so that if you are living below the poverty line, for example, you shouldn't have to make the choice. The lights that you use, if you're fortunate to be able to live in your own home, or whether you live in a community home, that the electrons that feed the AC systems and the lights are in fact, quote unquote, green. So my point is, move upstream and work on the energy transition in a way that we as consumers will no longer have to choose. It'll be the choice will be made for us. That's the future that I would hope we can all achieve at some point. And those of us who are looking at sort of the energy transition, I think that's the aspiration, frankly.
I think that's a wonderful one. And I love that you point out, because this is what we're at the core of this conversation about climate justice, is how do we bring people along that haven't had the infrastructure, the social cohesion, the economic access opportunities of those of us in the global north, and even those of us in the global north at certain income and socioeconomic statuses, because we're at a point where if only those of us who can make those choices move forward, we're not going to make our target. And it shouldn't come at the behest of those who've not had the same opportunities. And
Yeah.
in an interview that we did together for the audience, I've had the opportunity to engage Saul before in Via Authority magazine. You talk about convincing business that alongside competition, there's cooperation, and more than one thing can be true at the same time. And we can be green and profitable at the same time as well. And so I'd love to hear you comment on that more. And also, for some of our business audience that may be queuing into this, is some things that they should be thinking about when we say we can cooperate, we can be green, we can be profitable at the same time. There's no mutual exclusivity in this conversation.
You're exactly right. And again, another sort of tenet, if I could describe it that way, of the Energy Star program was exactly what you just said, Monica, which is, there are ways to become energy responsible and sustainable, that are also profitable. And I think if there's a single program out there that's demonstrated that, of course, has been the Energy Star program. I call it across multiple categories of consumer and business products. I think the way that I would sort of maybe answer that, or at least begin to answer that, is there's never been a time in the Americas, in the United States in particular, to explore the value of climate technologies and sustainability writ large. The current administration, as you well know, has devoted $2 trillion in the form of America's Jobs Plan and Inflation Reduction Act funding that provides opportunities to invest in technologies that can significantly reduce our impacts on the environment, certainly climate, and can reduce your cost of capital in ways that have never existed. I mean, the way that I describe this opportunity right now, Monica, is, if you think about, the size of it, it is twice what FDR spent in the New Deal in real
Mhm.
dollars. And that was spent over the course of 5 to 6 years. This is monies that are being devoted over the course of 5 years, and so it's a significant investment. So if there's ever been an opportunity to sort of evaluate the revenue generating aspects of circularity, of decarbonization, of carbon capture, of solar, of wind, gosh, any other topic, the time is now. So if you are listening to my voice, and Monica, if they're tracing and tracking your discussions, and you're not familiar with the opportunities that currently exist as we sit out of the Department of Energy, the Department of Transportation, and multiple non-federal public sector, institutions, whether it's cities, states, municipalities, et cetera, counties, then I would encourage you to take a look, because those opportunities are there again, to generate new business from sustainability.
Yeah, and I appreciate you pointing out FDR because this is a once in a generation opportunity. And I wonder if people are really internalizing what's taking place in this investment and the messaging coming from the federal government.
Yeah,
Is that the last time Americans in the United States took on a project like this was when we reimagined what national infrastructure could look like.
that's
And
right.
in some way, shape, or form, this is an invitation to reimagine it again. And what we have here is, if people are tracking, and I hope that you are, know this is a whole of government. It's not just what's in the Infrastructure Investment Act and the bipartisan infrastructure bill. We also have the Justice 40 initiative. There's even more funding to do business acceleration with the Small Business Administration to look at technological advancement, ecological advancement. So I hope people are tracking that and taking advantage of it, and that people in the communities are understanding that technical assistance is available. So when we say industry, we're not defining it by a certain level of capacity, right?
That's right. And the other thing I might suggest, Monica, again, is for those organizations that are listening to us and are interested in exploring new avenues and expanding their footprint on the topic of sustainability, is to not be intimidated by the response that's required. And in many instances, in fact, in most instances, these funds are landing in your cities, in your communities, in your states, and they're considered to be quote unquote formulaic funds, which is to say they don't have to be competed. The city is now a recipient of X amount of funds, and they're there to be dispersed. Frankly, there's others, of course, categories of competitive grants which you have to compete against, etc. But in the case of formulaic grants, large institutions, I'm sorry, large cities rather, are in a position now to just figure out how to spend those monies in keeping with the spirit of the AJP and the IRA. So I would encourage you to explore that and not be intimidated by what you might perceive as being the process of responding. It's not as daunting nearly as you might think.
Yes, absolutely. And we'll be sure to put links in the show notes for people to be able, if they're listening to the podcast, they want to know more. When you listen to this or watch it, because it'll be on Google Podcasts, we'll put the link in the show notes so that you're able to do some investigation and look into these opportunities as you see fit. I did want to talk to you because your area of responsibility is the Americas. And your origin story begins in the Americas. Just part of why I corrected myself in using that term, because we're talking about an entire region, an entire group of folks. In some of the work that I've done in this hemisphere, I'm heartened to see us transitioning from this perspective of seeing the rest of the region as being beneficiaries of United States action and starting to see sovereign leaders in Central and South America begin to address this issue, some of which we can learn a great deal from, but also seeing young people in the rest of the region begin to truly engage in this conversation around how are we going to meet the goals that we need to meet as a global society. And so I'd love to hear some more about your engagement in the region and also your perspective on not just how we move forward where we're sitting in the United States, but also how we embrace this as a global community and looping together different generations and different government and industry and different parts of society. It's a big question, but I have a
No.
suspicion that you can do
Sure.
this.
Well, let me start with the latter part of that question, which is sort of the generational discussion. And I pinch myself every day that I do this work, especially those days where I get to interact with the next generation, because just
Yes.
the level of commitment and enthusiasm and just focus on purpose. And what I tell our teams and what I tell certainly our young consultants, and I'll tell anyone who will listen to me that's whether it's my children or their friends, etc., that we all deserve to do what we love in life. And I've just found it so refreshing to find so many children K through 12 or in college that are passionate and quote unquote love the pursuit of environmental responsibility in one way, shape, or form. And they come to us here at Capgemini, the young consultants that are just getting started. They may have been hired to do something completely unrelated, and they come to us. They find us and say, "Hey, how can I be involved?" So I am very optimistic that when we hand the baton over to the next generation, that they'll be in good hands, and hopefully, we will not have done too much harm by the time they take over. And I'm also optimistic that by the time they get to be, in a position to buy homes and invest in their communities, that the passion and their desire for purpose and mission and their commitment to sustainability will not go away. I think it has staying power, and I just get so energized by that. To be honest with you, I really, really
Yeah.
do. And on that note, I may have someone that you might want to speak with, Monica, who I've just recently got to meet, a young lady here at the Potomac School in McLean who has her own podcast, and I've actually interviewed her, and we've interviewed her. So it
Ooh.
might be your audience, I suspect, may well really benefit and enjoy listening from her. So as an indication of what this generation has by way of their potential. Latin America, of course, is close to my heart because I grew up in Nicaragua. I have family there. And so the south of the border, if I can describe it that way, is a geography. Whether it's Mexico all the way down to Argentina, is just a community that I've just very bonded to. And so, yes, my responsibilities do include making sure that our teams and our clients and our partners equally mobilize around the sustainability agenda as it's defined in their own communities. Let me give you a couple of cases in point.
Please.
I just recently came out of a tour of Sao Paulo, and I was there with our team from Southern Latam, which is largely based out of Sao Paulo, and talked about what we as Capgemini can do to catalyze work. And of course, you can't have a conversation in Brazil without talking about deforestation. And so
Right.
we're mobilizing a team, at Capgemini and our clients to see if we can introduce business models that rely less on cutting trees in the Amazon. And I think we're getting some success there. And I was glad to see just last week that several countries in Latin America signed essentially an agreement, if you will, to do everything they could from a policy and regulatory standpoint to curb the level of and the extent of deforestation in the Amazon. So that's a great success.
Wonderful.
So we are engaging with our, our counterparts in Latin America. We believe financial services is a large, sort of, leverage point, if you will,
Yeah.
in certainly in Brazil and in southern Latin America. So we're working with many clients, including Bradesco and Santander, which have a very, very large presence in those regions. Mexico faces its own challenges. It doesn't take much to drive through certain parts of Mexico City to see the solid waste is a major issue.
Yeah.
And of course, low level ozone is a major issue in Mexico. Not the greenhouse gases and carbon isn't an issue, but they have to contend with other issues. So we've had a lot of conversations with clients down there, including Grupo Bimbo and others, to sort of see if we can introduce circular business models that would enable us to capture some or reduce some of the waste that you see in many of the sort of rural streets in and around Mexico City, for example. Puerto Rico is another very, very active of market for us. In a prior life, I was sort of the CEO of Accenture Puerto Rico, and so spent a great deal of time in San Juan and Puerto Rico. And of course, Puerto Rico is also, ironically enough, the beneficiary of still post hurricane funding at a
Yes.
FEMA, at a Department of Energy, and of course, they are also the recipients of significant infrastructure funding from the IRA. So we're working closely with friends at Microsoft and other organizations that have had a footprint in Puerto Rico for some time, and fully expect to start making a big difference there. We've got a small footprint at the moment as Capgemini, but as a result of several very close ecosystem partners in Puerto Rico, we've got a few projects that we've already put forward, and we're optimistic that we'll be able to bring those to life in the next couple months.
I think, yes, Puerto Rico is also a place that's very close to my heart. My more charming half is Puerto Rican and Dominican, and
Wow.
I belong to a network of researchers in solidarity between New Orleans and San Juan, because in many ways, New Orleans is still recovering from Hurricane Katrina whilst
Absolutely.
wrestling with the advance of climate change. And as you brought up, Puerto Ricans are still recovering from Hurricane Maria and the secondary challenge of climate action, and also dealing with some digital justice issues too. Parts of the island have some of the fastest internet speed in the Caribbean, and some people have no access at all.
Yeah.
But our work is centered on collecting community level data that normally does not get accessed, so that we can enable the stakeholders who are investing in the island and thinking about the island's future to have good information, valid information, that we otherwise couldn't resource. So I'm
Yeah.
very excited about the possibilities of helping Puerto Rico. And I love anytime someone brings up Puerto Rico or Central America, because I think those are places that offer so much that we can learn as well as how we can help.
Well, we'd love to stay connected on that one, Monica. If you're interested, it's again, so we have an entire team devoted to sort of finding ways for us to make a positive difference in Puerto Rico, and one of those teams is focusing on helping to enable small and medium-sized enterprises in Puerto Rico participate in the reconstruction of Puerto Rico. As the cost of contracting and legal environment in Puerto Rico has been a difficult one.
Yeah.
But I think many see this as a sort of a new, a sort of a soft reboot, if you will, of opportunities in Puerto Rico. But what we don't want to happen is to leave those underserved communities across the Commonwealth out. And so we are working on a program to enable them and to provide financing, if you will, to SMEs in the Commonwealth, so that they can participate in the growth of the Commonwealth, and not only benefit, but help catalyze some of that growth.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that, you're talking about participation. And I think with that comes understanding, because as an attorney by trade, I saw some interesting things happen just because people didn't understand the difference between the legal system in Puerto Rico
Yeah,
and in other parts of the Americas, and began to design structures that are centered in common law principles. For those of y'all who are listening, that's law as practiced by the United States and the United Kingdom and a few other English speaking countries,
yeah,
versus civil law, which takes place in comes from Spain and former Spanish colonies, and France and former French colonies, and operates very differently, particularly when you get into financing and regulation. And that's, been a challenge to the growth of the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, as well as some jurisdictions in Latin America and the French Caribbean. And so there's parts of this of understanding the systems and also understanding the people
Yeah,
when we're talking about how do we solution in certain places.
that's exactly right. Yeah.
We're coming up on time, and I just wanted to talk about one more topic. I love that we're having this global conversation, which means there's all kinds of terms flying around. And you brought up circular economy a couple of times. And I also hear people saying that alongside indigenous knowledge, which takes on all kinds of meanings. And particularly when we're talking about this region, all of it, there are things that we can pull from communities that have been in place prior to the arrival of many of the rest of us, however you want to define us, that are in their very essence circular. And I'm wondering if you have some thoughts, some comments about how we're using this terminology, but also how do we incorporate pre-existing knowledge into the work that we're trying to do.
Right. I'm sort of trying to tease out maybe parts of that question there, Monica. I think you're right that the term circularity is one that's tossed around pretty frequently, and it's sort of depending on who uses it, it probably has a different definition.
Yeah.
I think the thing that I sort of think about when it comes to capturing assets at end of life or end of use. End of life is not the right term. A good friend of mine, Bill McDonough, the famed architect, and based in Charlottesville, keeps reminding me that we shouldn't use the term end of life. Life refers to organic beings, and end of use is probably more accurate. And end of use is not fully accurate because it ought to not be end of use. It's end of current use. And so when I think about sort of this notion of circularity, we actually say I and our teams at Capgemini try to be very surgical about what we mean. And what we mean about that is sort of capturing, of course, the remaining raw materials and so on that could be repurposed to build the new energy transition. We just completed a research piece, the Capgemini Research Institute, which I think came up with several pretty startling results. One of which is that if we were to capture something like 75% of the metals at end of current use that we currently use globally, we would obviate the need for mining for new metals entirely for building the energy transition. Obviously, smart grids and wind turbines and solar, they're made out of metals, and so why do we have to go and extract new iron ore and new metals from the ground when we in fact can sort of capture at end of current use and repurpose those metals to the energy transition? So those startling numbers, and those are numbers that that we stand by. And so that's a perfect example, I think, of sort of the perfect sort of use case, if you will, to use a consulting term, of circularity. And the ability to capture those metals is not difficult. I mean, we have sort of the technological wherewithal and certainly the managerial wherewithal to do that. And so that's a perfect case in point. The other, I think, aspect of circularity is one that maybe others don't think about a whole lot, which is what every single one of us can do. And that's something that you can do at home, which is to compost. That's circular, right? We don't have to throw banana peels into the garbage, really.
Yeah.
We can compost them. And so, every banana peel that we throw in the garbage is room occupied in the landfill. And so to the extent that we as individuals can recapture our waste, clearly we should recycle. Clearly we should do that. And if your community doesn't have a recycling program for glass and plastics and paper, then you have to insist that it should. And I hope everyone listening has one. But in addition to that, we also should actually recapture at the end of current use that stuff which is compostable, and then use it as soil in our own yards. So that's one way, I think, to sort of participate in circularity as individuals. The other way, and I'm a big believer in this, and ironically enough, 40% of our greenhouse gas emissions comes from food waste,
Yeah.
and 40% of the food that we purchase is actually waste. It goes out the back door. So another form of quote unquote circularity is to reduce our portion sizes, to be much more selective, to insist that our retailers sell us smaller portion sizes. Somehow we entered into a race, back in the 70s, perhaps, that was based on volume, one sort of food retailer decided to trump the next with ever more portion sizes. And we're to the point now where we buy things and we leave half of them, and we don't even take them home. And so that's another form of circularity that, again, if you're listening, as a consumer, or frankly, if you work for an organization, if you have the ability to sort of influence purchasing, then that would be another place where you can have a pretty significant influence on our, what goes into landfills, and frankly on our greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, thank you. Those are both wonderful suggestions. And there are organizations out there that are helping to recapture food waste and redistribute it, because
Yeah.
that consumption also breaks down across different communities. So, again, I encourage folks to think about this.
And what's really interesting, Monica, is this race to volume and race to portion size that started in the 70s doesn't make financial sense based on what you talked about, a sort of financial business case. If you look at sort of the food, the retail sector, we some of our teams have done this analysis. If you look at sort of the financial returns on a per serving basis of a large meal
Right.
relative to two equal sized meals, the ROI almost invariably goes towards the two smaller sized meals, because you've got less. You've got less refrigeration, you've got less shipping, you have less storage, you have perhaps fewer et cetera, et cetera. So if you were to do the business case around serving and a meal that's 100%
Yeah.
relative to a meal that's 50-60% of the other, you'll almost invariably find that the return on investment of that smaller meal, that portion size, is higher
Than if you go with the supersize everything,
if you
to
go with a
quote a
super.
marketing campaign we're familiar with.
Never mind the fact that, again, on the supersize, a consumer very often doesn't eat it. This is why we have 40% of our food go out the back door.
So, thank you for being a guest. Thank you especially for talking to us about things that are accessible, whether you're an individual or if you're working at a larger scale. And we will definitely stay in touch. I'm looking forward to hearing more about what you're doing at Capgemini and what you're doing in your work with industry and community. This has been the Undivide Project Podcast, Changemakers Edition. We express so much gratitude to you, Mr. Sol Salinas, for joining us, as well as to our partners at Authority Magazine for helping us bring this all together.
Thank you, Monica, for having me.